This year is the bicentennial of the War of 1812, and probably because of this, there are several games that came out on the topic. Earlier in the year, we have had Academy Games 1812 Invasion of Canada, recently Clash of Arms, published Amateurs to Arms, and to keep with the spirit of the year, I've actually decided to also play a classic game on the topic, War of 1812. In this edition by Columbia Games, Panatrade, this is a more recent edition of the classic game, because War of 1812 is a game that has been around for some decades now, and it is one of the oldest block war games. The back of the box tells you that the game can be set up in 10 minutes or less and played to completion in under 2 hours. I've read such claims on the back of many boxes, but rarely are such claims true. In this case, they are. Actually, it is true that this game can be taught in 15 minutes or less, set up in 10 minutes or less, and played in 90 minutes or 2 hours. So it is a game that definitely is easy to fit in your busy schedule, easier than many other war games. And it still is a war game. It still feels like a war game, not as some sort of war-themed abstract game. Anyways, enough for this introduction. Let's take a closer look at the game. This is the map for the game. It has this somewhat elongated shape. It is printed on cardstock. It looks really nice, as you will see when I will show it to you more in detail, but I wanted to start with a general look at the map and at how the map may look at setup with the British units here on this side of the map and the American units on this other side here, and with some units there in Detroit. At the beginning of the game, the American player draws 12 blocks from his pool of available units. Those are the units that are still there after the initial setup, and those units are then placed on the board, and they're placed in town. Towns have a numerical value printed by them. That value indicates the number of units that can be quartered in that town during winter, and that number also indicates the amount of victory points that the opponent scores by occupying that town. You only score points for occupation of enemy towns. During setup, the players must place a block, at least one block, in each of their towns with a numerical value of 2 or more. So first the American player sets up his blocks, then the British player draws 10 blocks, not 12, and those blocks are deployed in British cities following the same rules and restrictions. So the British player starts with less blocks, but those blocks are pretty good. They are, individually speaking, better than the American blocks. Also, at the beginning of the game, each player receives 3 naval units, which are placed one in each lake. And units are placed at an initial strength of 1 pip, whereas the other blocks start at full strength. The game can be played in 2 ways. It can be played non-simultaneously, that is, at the beginning of each turn, you roll dice to determine who is the player that will play his player turn first, or the game can be played simultaneously, that is, both players write down orders that are given to their units, and then they will resolve those units simultaneously, and there are different rules to handle situations that may arise because of that. When it is your player turn, first you have the naval phase, during which you can build warships. You can add a pip to a warship that is already on the board, or you can add a pip to a warship that is not on the board yet. That is, you simply add a warship with a pip, with a single pip, with a strength of 1. And each lake has only one lakeside town in which you can build ships. Or you can use your naval phase to move ships. You activate a lake and you can move any and all of the ships in that lake. Ships can be moved from a town to the lake or from the lake to a town. And if when moving ships encounter other warships of the opponent, then you have a naval battle which is resolved immediately, and I will talk about that later. After the naval phase, you have the army phase, during which the active player will activate to one location and will move any and all blocks that are present in that location. Blocks in the activated location may move to adjacent locations. And they have a movement allowance, which is represented by the number printed at the bottom left corner of the block. Most units have a 1, so they just move to one adjacent location. Some units have a 2, so they can move up to 2 locations connected by roads, but they have to stop if they enter a location that contains enemy blocks. And you can send your units all in one location. You can move some units and leave some behind, move units to different locations. What you do with the blocks in the activated location is completely up to you. And after movement, you will have to resolve combat in all locations that contain blocks belonging to both players. During the army phase, you may also choose to move your land units by amphibious movement. That is, you move units through a lake and you move units of the activated location through a lake, and the number of units that you can move is up to the number of warships that are already there, that were there at the beginning of the turn, and that you did not move during the naval phase. If those 2 warships were already there and didn't do anything during the naval phase, then I could activate that location and move these 2 units to that town. Again, it is about the number of blocks, not the strength of the warships. Naval combat is simultaneous. It takes place when there are warships of both players in a lake. Both players roll a number of dice equal to the number of pips that they have in the battle. In this case, both players would roll 4 dice, and a unit hits when it rolls its firepower or less. Or all warships have a firepower of 1, so it is not a matter of rolling less, it is just 1. They hit on a 1. Suppose that the British player rolled, and this is the roll, then there is a 1 hit on the Americans, but the American player gets to roll 4 dice before the hit is applied, because, again, naval combat is simultaneous. No hits, too bad, then the American player takes a hit, and hits must be assigned to the strongest block in the formation. In case of a tie, it is the owning player that chooses the block that receives the hit. And players keep rolling and attacking each other until one of the 2 sides is completely annihilated, or until one of the 2 sides decides to retreat. Land combat is very similar to naval combat. The main difference is that it is not simultaneous. The defender fires first, the results are applied, then the attacker fires, and players alternate attacking until one of the 2 sides is completely eliminated or one of the 2 sides retreats. When it is your round to act in a battle, you can choose to retreat or to attack. If you decide to attack, you roll a number of dice equal to the number of pips that you have in the battle, and like in naval combat, you hit by rolling your firepower or less. And players keep rolling and inflicting hits on each other until one of the 2 sides is completely eliminated or until one of the 2 sides retreats. But the side that is winning the battle and forced the other side to retreat gets to execute pursuit fire. Infantry blocks receive 1 die when they are rolling for pursuit fire, so it is always 1 die, doesn't matter the number of pips, but that die during pursuit fire counts as F3. That means that die will inflict a hit on the opponent with a roll of 1, 2, or 3, much better than the usual firepower. Artillery units do not have pursuit fire. Dragoons, on the contrary, are particularly deadly during pursuit fire because they receive 2 dice at F3 during pursuit fire. The game is divided in years, and each year is divided in 10 turns plus a win turn. At the end of the 10th turn of a year, you check victory and you count victory points. You score a victory point for each block that you have in the game, 2 victory points for each lake that you control, and then the amount of points of the enemy cities that you are occupying. If at that point a player has 10 victory points more than the opponent, the game is over. The game theoretically may be over at the end of the first year, otherwise it continues for one more year, and it can continue for up to 3 years. At the end of the third year, you again count victory points. If a player has 10 points more than the opponent, the player wins the game. Otherwise, the game is a draw. During winter, also players receive reinforcements, and the schedule of reinforcements is printed by the towns through which the reinforcements will enter the game. This is probably the simplest block war games that I've ever played in terms of number and complexity of rules. It is even easier and more accessible than Quebec 1759, which probably was the simplest block war game I ever played before this one. This is just a game that you can learn and teach so easily. It is really a great introduction to block war gaming. If you are trying to introduce a new player to this style of games, this would be great. Not only because of the rules, but also because the game is so beautifully self-contained. In 2 hours, you can play the entire game and you really see the story. There really is a strong narrative that develops here, and that is dictated maybe is a stronger word, is influenced by the schedule of the reinforcements. You know that the British side will receive a considerable amount of reinforcements later in the game. That, of course, means that the American side has the burden of the attack early in the game because the American player is trying to gain enough territory that then the advantage will be retained even after the British counter-push in the later phases of the game. So there definitely is a clear structure that tends to represent itself in a similar fashion from game to game. At the same time, there are a lot of ways in which you can experiment and add replay value to the game. You have variable setup, which is good. Also, you have only a limited amount of activations, and you have many areas on the map, and areas that are pretty distant from one another, especially when you consider the low movement allowance that most blocks have. That means that if you want to move a reinforcement from one area of the map to a relatively far away area, you have to plan in advance. It will cost you a certain amount of activations, and again, you do not have a million of those. I like the fact, in fact, that you need to plan ahead. You need to have a medium long-term plan of the objectives that you want to concentrate on, because you simply will not have the time and the resources to be fully effective on all areas on the map. You need to choose your objectives, try to come up with a plan to reach those objectives, and of course then you will have to make adjustments based on the way in which the other player acts. And I really like that, this balance between the long-term decisions and the short-term reactions. I really like the simultaneous way of playing the game. This is definitely my favorite way. Not only does it add more subtleties, because of course there is the entire bluffing component, but also it reduces the luck factor, because you have clearly more luck if you're rolling dice before each turn to decide who is going first. In some cases that can really be a crucial role. I just prefer not to have that, but again, there's nothing wrong with that way of playing the game either. This is a game that is simple, this is a game that is very accessible, but it is not that simple to master. It is not so easy to come up with a bulletproof strategy that will always work. I like the fact that the victory conditions make draw a very possible result, which makes perfect sense historically when we're talking about a game, a war that has also been described as the war that nobody won. And the times in which I played the game and one of the two players did win, in fact, it wasn't by a vast margin. It was a little above the draw limit, but not so much. So the game is balanced, and that of course is good. Again, in general terms, is good for an intro game, and it is good for this specific theme. So War of 1812, definitely a classic game, a game that has been around for a long time, and I think there is a reason for that. I think it will be around for long. At least I know this is a game that I will play in the future, and this is a game that I'm very happy to have in my collection.